10 years ago today, at this time, the polls had just closed on Scotland's independence referendum. Since then, a lot has happened, but Scotland remains part of the United Kingdom. So what are the big issues for people here in Edinburgh on this anniversary? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. To be back for a new series of Debate Night, the programme where you get to put your questions to the people in power, answering them on our panel this evening. He was the man who negotiated the independence referendum 10 years ago, former First Minister and former leader of the SNP, Alex Salmond. Now the leader of the Alba Party, he believes Scotland is worse in every respect than it was 10 years ago. From the SNP Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Economy and Gaelic, Kate Forbes. The MSP for Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch, Kate was narrowly defeated by Humza Yousaf in last year's leadership contest. She believes the SNP must now change tack to ensure their priorities match those of the public. Also with us this evening, the Deputy Leader of Scottish Labour and Party Spokesperson for Health and Social Care, Jackie Baillie. The MSP for Dumbarton, Jackie was 10 years ago a director of the Better Together campaign, something she now feels Scottish Labour shouldn't have been involved in. And finally, former Scottish Conservative leader and MSP for Eastwood, Jackson Carlaw. Jackson spent 6 months as party leader, but quit the role as he didn't feel he was the right person to lead the party in the Holyrood elections. He has warned the current leadership race could split the Scottish Conservatives. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And welcome to our studio audience here in Edinburgh. It's great to be back with you in Scotland's capital city. And you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you happen to be in Scotland this evening. BBC DN is the hashtag you need right now on social media, and our Debate Night podcast will be available for you to download straight after the show. So let's get started this evening on this big day, the 10th anniversary of the independence referendum. When we think back at this time 10 years ago, polls had closed and we were waiting for the result. Where were you and how were you feeling at this time? Alex Salmond.
I was writing a concession speech, and I have to say I've had better moments in my life. But I was coming down from Aberdeenshire to Edinburgh about this time, exactly 10 years ago. Obviously, you don't concede until arithmetically it's impossible to win. But the first result was Clackmannan, which is the wee county. But Clackmannan often votes as Scotland votes. So when the result from Clackmannan came in, I decided it would be a good idea to have a concession speech ready. I'd written the victory speech earlier that afternoon, incidentally, so I had both. But the concession speech I was writing.
And you were feeling shocked?
No, not shocked, incredibly disappointed. I mean, it's quite interesting. When we started the campaign back in 2012, yes support was 28%. And if you told me then you're going to get 45%, I'd have said, well, that's pretty good, you know. But in the last few weeks of the referendum, the polls were closing and the Yes campaign had a lot of momentum. So in the last few weeks of the campaign, we thought we might just do it. So therefore, it was a substantial disappointment when we didn't quite make it.
Kate Forbes, where were you and how were you feeling at this time 10 years ago?
Well, hugely excited and enthusiastic. I think there was a real sense amongst those that supported independence that this would be it. And then, I wasn't in elected politics. I was nobody important at all. So just watching it as a member of the public who'd been involved. And as Alex Salmond said, when the Clackmannanshire result came in, just that sense of being totally and utterly gutted. Because I think in the last few weeks, those of us that supported independence had really hoped. We thought it was actually possible. And then, obviously, the results continued to confirm that.
Put your hands up in the audience. I want to hear where you were, maybe at an event or watching at home and looking forward to. Keep your hands up. I'll come to you in just a second. Jackie Baillie, though, where were you and how were you feeling?
So we started off in the constituency in Dumbarton as the boxes closed because I wanted to be there for that. And then we went into Better Together had got a venue where we all watched the results come in together. And I remember just being a sense of optimism, of hope. And when I saw the result come through, it was bigger than we expected. It was 55% voting to remain in the United Kingdom, 45% wanting to leave, and that was 400,000 of a majority. It was emphatic, but what it also told me is that there is an appetite for change in the country. They didn't want the status quo, they wanted change, and we all needed to recognise that, whether you supported yes or no, and that was the lesson for me that night. But fatigue, I think, would probably describe how I was, because we didn't sleep. And I remember doing an interview at 6 o'clock in the morning, not in my pyjamas, where I genuinely had not had a single minute of sleep.
Jackson, I'll come to you in just a second, but let me just hear from the audience now. Man in the maroon shirt up the back there.
Yes, I remember being 17, so I was in 6th year, so about roughly 6 a.m. I woke up and I instantly went on my phone to say, what is the live result? And it wasn't long before then that Fife had declared, I remember it, and that was it when you said, their declaration has meant that no has officially won. So while I wasn't surprised by that, it was very surprising to see how far yes and no were comparison to polling. And I think that I was a bit upset because I had voted yes, but it was largely as a protest vote to say things need to change in the UK. Scotland needs more powers, and I think that we should always be a federalist country where all 4 nations have more power.
Thank you. Man in the black shirt over here.
I was actually at home with my kids watching on television, but interestingly enough, my wife, who worked for the local council at the time, was actually at the counting the votes. So we went to bed when she came home, but although she shouldn't have said, it was kind of obvious which way Lothian was going when she came home. Yeah. So, bitterly disappointed.
Thank you. Lady in the front row down here.
I was young, I was 24, I was working in a pizza restaurant. I've got a different job now, I work in education. I did vote no, which I think was a bit unusual for my age group. I voted to remain, which I stood by at the time. Then in the years to come, I began to regret that a little bit. I felt a lot more hopeful back then. Then after the EU referendum, I did really go for independence, and now I'm kind of on the fence with it. So I've changed a bit in 10 years. Yeah.
Interesting. Jackson Carlow, 10 years ago this time, where were you and how are you feeling?
I was heading towards East Renfrewshire, where the count was going to take place. How was I feeling? I was absolutely astonished at the turnout. I mean, I think the thing that really overwhelmed me was, in my own constituency, it was over 90%. Now, when I was a young guy, and the Soviet Union used to say they had turnouts of 90% in their elections, we all used to laugh and say, aye, right. But 90% of people had come out to vote. And I'd very much wanted the government to be able to have the question they wanted, the franchise they wanted, and the date they wanted. Because I felt when I saw the result, that is decisive. We have resolved this question. We can now put it behind us. How stupid was I? Because the campaign for a second referendum began the next day. The referendum resolved nothing, and here we are 10 years later, and it still is an issue that the referendum failed to resolve, and we are still divided.
That takes us quite nicely to our first question of the evening tonight in this new series of Debate Night, and it comes from Craig Ford. Craig, good evening.
Good evening. How do you think Scotland would differ if we'd voted yes 10 years ago?
How do you think Scotland would differ if we'd voted yes 10 years ago? Kate Forbes.
So I think we'd have differed in quite a big way. So I think probably in the first few months and few years there would have been lots of negotiations and discussions, but 10 years on things would have been quite considerably different. I think one of the biggest differences would be that we know that Scotland, for example, has a huge wealth of natural resources. We are driving the renewables revolution in the UK, and yet our energy bills are sky high. And there's a total injustice to that. And I don't know if you heard the chief executive of Octopus Energy say that Scotland should really have the cheapest energy bills in Europe, and at times pay nothing for their energy, but that requires reforms, and reforms are at a UK level. That's just one example, but I think it illustrates that at the end of the day, if it's the people that are living here that are making the decisions on these matters, then it nearly always is better. And we could still work with our closest neighbours and allies on other issues of importance, you know, in terms of security and defence and so on. But on these central issues that make such a big difference, and we all know how hard it has been with the cost of living crisis, particularly driven by energy. And if I could be cheeky for a moment, we were hoping that with Labour, energy bills might come down by £300. They've just gone up by £149. Yeah. So it's still an outstanding issue.
OK, we'll come to that. I mean, we are going to talk about other things this evening as well. Alex Salmon, you said the last decade has been a wasted decade of opportunity. If Scotland had voted yes 10 years ago, what would be different?
Well, I think the biggest difference would still be in Europe, I mean, which would be substantially economically beneficial. If you take current issues, Kate's quite right. I mean, you wouldn't be having, 900,000 pensioners looking forward to freezing this winter because Scotland is a huge energy provider. Nor would you be having the threatened closure in the next few weeks of Scotland's only refinery. I mean, why? Because there's, the top 25 oil and gas producing countries in the world all refine their own product. So obviously Scotland, as an independent country, wouldn't be facing closure of its refineries. So whether you take these big current issues like heating bills, or whether you take the big strategic issues, or whether Scotland as a European nation should have a defined relationship with our colleagues and partners in Europe, we'd already have a very substantially different, I believe, better society.
But you've said under the SNP, every aspect of life in Scotland has got worse, Alex.
Yeah, because we stayed in the Union. We've had 10 years of austerity. Look, I'm not claiming that Scotland would have been a land of milk and honey, but I'm saying would be a land of oil, gas and massive renewable energy, and we'd be best placed to face the future as an independent country.
Jackie Baillie.
I can't help but observe that after 10 years, every institution in Scotland is weaker, and those are areas where the Scottish government, the SNP government, have total control. So our NHS, where we have 1 in 6 people on waiting lists, our education system, where the attainment gap is probably at its biggest ever. We have problems with the economy not growing at the rate it should be. Child poverty is stagnating. We're not making progress there. So on every measure that the Scottish Government, the SNP, have control over, we are worse off. And I have to say, if I was wanting to make an argument for independence, you'd think at least you'd run the government you have better than they are currently doing.
Let me hear from the audience. Gentleman in the navy shirt in the middle here. Yes.
With regards to independence, just before I came here, my wife had voted to stay in UK, and I voted independent. But she said that if the Brexit and the independent votes, the referendums were the other way round, she would have voted to stay in, because Scotland got taken out of European Union, we didn't want it. We wanted to stay in there, but we were dragged out by the UK government.
And of course, during the referendum campaign itself, one of the key arguments of Jackie and her colleagues, if you vote yes, you'll jeopardise Scotland's position in Europe. You'll be dragged out of Europe. If you vote yes, we voted no, and what happened, Jackie? We got dragged out of the European Union.
But I have to say, that was a choice that the Tories made. I didn't ever
supported by Labour.
Hold on. I didn't ever want us to leave Europe. But the reality is, if you'd voted to be independent, you would have had to leave Europe. We would have needed to renegotiate entry. And you know that with the deficit that we currently have, which is about... No, it is. These are facts.
No, that's
10%
about joining
of a
the
deficit
Euro,
means
Jackie.
you wouldn't have been able to join the European Union without joining the Euro. It's a fact.
Two things are not true. There are 7 countries in the European Union, and many of them are not in the Euro. You don't have to be in the Euro to be in the European Union. And the test you're talking about in budgetary terms is admission to the Euro as a currency, not admission to the European Union. Because if it were, then many countries in the European Union wouldn't pass it at the present moment.
Every country now
these were the scare stories
the Euro.
of 10 years
Every
ago.
country now.
It feels like we've moved back in time in a time machine, doesn't it? So let's get back to the question, which was, how would Scotland be now if we'd voted yes? Man in the black shirt up at the back. Yes.
I just wanted to know, Mr Salmon, 10 years on for the independence referendum, what would be our central bank? And would we still be using tiddlywinks for currency.
Well, if you watched the BBC debate in the end of August 2014, you'd have seen Alistair Darling admit we couldn't have been stopped from using sterling. But I'll tell you something very interesting now. The use of sterling was postulated on Scotland and the rest of the UK both being part of the EU. Now we're in a situation where we're Brexited. Now I think we should go back probably into EFTA to get a relationship with Europe. But you're in a much freer position to have your own currency now. And the arguments for having a Scottish currency are much, much stronger than they were in a situation where the rest of the UK was in Europe. So the arguments change with time. And the independence campaign has to update its arguments. So they're not the arguments of 2014, but the arguments for 2024 and the next 10 years.
OK, Jackson Carlo.
Well, there's an awful lot of ground has been covered with these questions. The 2014 referendum was led by Alex Salmond on the basis that his government, elected in 2007 to 2011, had shown a degree of competence. And his argument was, look what we've done as a government, this is what we could be if we're an independent nation. And I think he quoted me as saying that if Scotland voted for independence, I would man the barricades with them in order to get the best deal out of the United Kingdom, because I would respect the result. But since 2014, it seems that the Scottish Government has been anything but competent. It's been wholly incompetent. On every front of domestic policy, it's failed. But the argument now is we're only failing because we're not independent. They're not saying we can be a competent government and showing the people of Scotland why they should look to independence again in the future.
One of the leadership candidates in your current leadership case said that the SNP government of 2007 was the best government in Scottish history. I'm looking forward to being on the barricades with you, Jackson. Absolutely.
Let's Kate Forbes just because you know the charge is to the government now. And here's Kate Forbes.
Can I make 2 points? One is the suggestion from Jackie Baillie that you look back at the last 10 years and that's the image of an independent Scotland. The whole point is that the last 10 years we haven't been independent.
Yep.
And the point I would make is that independence
between 2007 and 11 then? You weren't independent
this
then either.
basic concept that it should be the people of the nation that determine the future of the nation. And that is divorced from any particular party, any particular moment. Democracy does not happen on a one-off basis. It is an ongoing process. And I just think that's a really important point. There will be people that support the SNP, some who don't, but who believe in Scotland's right to choose and Scotland's better future.
But on his point, has competency declined?
Well, in terms of, you know, we've delivered 128,000 affordable homes. We've expanded 1140 hours of childcare.
Well, what haven't you done, Kate? There's a long list of things that are very important.
We know that there are
longer waiting lists, failing schools, no ferries.
There's no doubt that we're facing challenges. But you know, and we have an objective, which is to eradicate child poverty, to ensure that our public services are resilient.
Well, you have objectives and targets you never achieve.
But these all are done with one hand tied behind our back. Nobody can tell me that these questions are divorced from funding, for example. They're absolutely part and parcel of the funding question. And we know that at the end of the day, the majority of our funding is determined by the UK government. So we are proud of the track record that we've had when it comes to, for example, delivering affordable homes, when it comes to early learning and childcare, when it comes to lifting 100,000 children out of poverty through initiatives that are only available here in Scotland. Those are actually facts backed up by evidence.
Can I say,
but
during your own leadership election, you criticised the SNP government, rightly so in my view.
On independence, there will be people here with different views on independence, different views on parties, but the bottom line is that it should be the people that live here who determine the future of this nation.
Let's hear from the people. Lady of the Blondes here.
Never thought I'd agree with a Tory, but the last 10 years have been incompetent. Since Mr. Salmond left, it's been rubbish. And he managed not once, but twice to stop INEOS moving from Grange House. Twice. You've done nothing. Your government has stayed totally quiet. It's given, the UK government has given £500 million to INEOS to move to Antwerp to start another refinery. Where's your voice for us? Where's your voice for the Labour Party?
Let Jackie respond. Jackie.
We have worked in partnership with the Scottish Government, something you never saw before. There was always conflict rather than cooperation. And so the UK Government has worked in partnership with the Scottish Government to agree a package, £100 million, of which 80 million is directly for a Falkirk growth deal.
Jackie,
500 million? What happened to the 500
we
million?
may come back to specifically answer this, but I want to stay on this question of 10 years on. Gentleman with the beard there.
Yeah, I was just picking up on something that Jackie Baillie said about having to renegotiate our way back into Europe. That's the whole point. We would have been in a position to renegotiate on behalf of Scotland for all our agreements internationally. So, whereas I think you maybe meant it's a negative, it's actually a positive for me.
Okay, and just one last one. Gentleman in the purple here. Yes.
Mr. Salmon, probably. You know, the point of independence is we took sovereignty back for ourselves. So we're totally ruling our own destinies. So we take it back from Westminster, but then we give it straight over to Brussels. Why was the proposition not that we were a completely standalone independent country who could have then negotiated something like Norway did with the EU? So we did control, absolutely controlled, all of our own functions.
Well, I mean, countries in the European Union are still independent countries. I mean, Scotland isn't an independent country, and of course the Brexit referendum demonstrated that. If you want an example of what the difference between devolution and independence is, the Brexit referendum tells you. Scotland voted every single area to stay in Europe, but we got dragged out of it. Can I just agree with this lady here in the 500 million that the Labour government are going to give to Ineos?
Alex, we are going to come on to that in just a second.
If you want to save Grangemouth, you can do it in one sentence. All you have to say to Ineos is, you see that 500 million? You're not getting it if you close Grangemouth, and then you'll see Grangemouth saved.
We don't give away the questions in debate night, but we are going to talk about that in just a second. Tonight we are in Edinburgh. Next week we're going to be in Dundee. The week after that we're going to be in Dumfries, and we'll continue our journey around Scotland over the course of the autumn. If you'd like to come along, as people have here tonight, be part of the audience and have your say, just go to the address bbc.co.uk/debate night. Right, lots more to discuss tonight, so let's go on to our second question of the night, which comes from William Clark. William, evening.
Good evening. What does the removal of the winter fuel payment say about Labour's priorities?
Thank you. Jackie Baillie, this already seems to be, according to the polls, costing you support here in Scotland. On the election debate edition of Debate Night, before the general election, Anna Sarwar said, "Read my lips, no austerity under Labour." Did we misread his lips that night?
No, I don't think you did. And I think, this is not a decision that anybody welcomes. Even, the Labour government that took the decision didn't want to do it. We were faced with a 22 billion black hole. Hold on, let me finish. That actually the OBR is now reviewing because the Tories hid what was going on. That's the reality. We have said we want to make sure that the fundamentals in both the budget and in the economy work. Is not a choice I would have wanted to make. I've got to be honest with you about that. But what we need to do is protect those pensioners who are absolutely the worst off. So those in receipt of pension credit, but actually they've extended that beyond that to attendance allowance as well, to make sure we capture those pensioners who are absolutely the worst off. But what I would also say is that the pension triple lock has delivered an extra £900 to every pensioner this year. Is anticipated to deliver £460 next year, and that's every pensioner across the country. And I think it's appropriate that we put money into the pockets of pensioners. This has been a difficult decision that I don't think anybody wanted to make.
OK, man in the white shirt and jacket there. Yes, on the aisle.
I think we need to be a bit more honest with some of these policies, and I think we're taking money off the wrong people. There are two easy ways that we can get money, and we can go first of all to the super wealthy people, excuse me, who, if we were to even give them, hit them with a wealth tax, they wouldn't even notice the difference. And also we should stop giving money to Ukraine to fund war, and that money going into the pockets of defence contractors that are largely based over in America. That's...
Thank you. Down here, yes.
Me, yes. I mean, I can't really understand why the Labour government decided that the first people to target for a cut was pensioners. I mean, I agree there are a lot of people that are wealthy, but there are a lot of pensioners that are just at the cut-off point, with a small a pension and who are going to really suffer. And I was with my twin sister, who's in that category, and she had voted Labour for the first time, and she felt completely betrayed because that was the first port of call of the Labour government, was to announce that. So I just think it was crass politics, whatever the economics of it. I mean, I just feel you antagonised a lot of people that were, potentially, pleased that you were going to do something about the public services, and you were going to, they wanted to get rid of the Tory party, but they were suddenly found themselves targeted in a way that they hadn't expected.
Jackie.
No, I understand that, and I hear what people are saying, but I can only say to you that my colleagues went into office not expecting that 22 billion black hole, which is over and above. No. I promise you, if you look at the letter from the OBR, they are reviewing what the Conservatives did in their budget because they didn't expect it either. And so we need to get the fundamentals right in order to build on that. And that's what we need to do, because I have been a Labour member for most of my natural life. For me, it's about hope and optimism. And I get that it's been difficult for people. I absolutely get that. So I am listening, and I will communicate those views to colleagues.
OK, all right. Kate Forbes, what does this say about Labour's priorities?
I find it impossible to believe that this was a big surprise, because we and others were at pains throughout the election campaign to say that the Labour Party were not being straight about the finances. Economists said that, and they led us up a garden path with great hope and optimism, and the first targets were not just pensioners, but actually all of us that are struggling to pay our fuel bills. So we know that winters are colder and longer in Scotland, and our pensioners, more than anybody else, need that extra help. They will be colder and they will be poorer this winter. So Labour have only had 2 months to prove themselves. They've shown where their priorities are, and it is going after pensioners. Now, we know that the finances are challenging. We talk about it at length in the Scottish Parliament. It has an impact on everything.
Well, you're cutting 500 million here. You've got your own difficult decisions to make.
Well, this is precisely the point. This is precisely the point, that we had hoped for an end of 14 years of austerity. We were longing for 14 years to come to an end and for there to be an injection of funding into our public services. That is what will get us out of this economic challenging time. But instead, they're doubling down, £22 billion of funding cuts on the backs of the poorest, who will now be colder than they would have been this winter.
Alex Salmond.
Well, this is the case of Jackie suffering from Scotland's lack of independence, because she's having to defend a decision of the London Labour Party over which she had no control whatsoever. And the lady in the second row is absolutely right. The people who really suffer from this are the people just above the pensioner benefit level, the income support level, people 15,000 to 20,000 a year, which is obviously not a fortune. But these are the people who are going to be faced with cutting back their heating or sitting with their clothes on. I remember a local by-election last year. On a Saturday afternoon, I canvassed a lady in Aberdeen, and she had a coat on, and I said, look, sorry, you're just going out. And she said, no, I'm sitting in my house, freezing, in Aberdeen on a summer's day. She had to have her coat on.
So what should they have done, Alex?
Well, right.
Where should they have found the money?
Right. Cut interest rates by 2.5%. You'll save £20 billion that they're paying in borrowing costs to financial institutions. It wouldn't hurt the economy. I mean, the economy is flat on its back at the present moment. The Fed is going to cut interest rates. So why not have a lower interest rate policy as opposed to a freezing pensioners policy? Plus, the fact is a nonsense anyway. Out of this 22 billion, the pensioners cut is only 1.5 billion. And the idea you couldn't have found that somewhere else is ridiculous. And furthermore, Jackie, whatever else an independent Scotland have been, you wouldn't, in this land of energy plenty, be inflicting fuel poverty on the pensioners of this country. You can absolutely guarantee that in this land of energy plenty, people would not have to worry about heating their homes in the winter.
Jackie Baillie?
Unfortunately, the SNP government have formed. They've cut the energy efficiency budget. They've cut the fuel insecurity fund, when actually they could have made a difference to pensioners. They even cut the eligibility for a winter payment for somebody who was on social security. That's what they've done. That's their record. They have no. That's the truth. And the reality is, we had a really ambitious target to end fuel poverty in Scotland. The SNP didn't just fail to meet it, fuel poverty on their watch has gone worse. No, it's the hypocrisy of this.
No, it's excuses. You know,
absolutely not.
At the end of the day, what's going to make pensioners colder and poorer in Scotland this winter? It's the Labour Party's choices. That is what's having an impact.
It's also the 3 emergency budgets that have been produced by the SNP as a result of
hang on a second. I want to hear from the audience on this, because these are the people affected by these decisions. Yes, you will in just a second. Gentleman in the front row here.
Well, I can't believe what I've heard from Jackie Baillie or from Kate, because Jackie Baillie, there wasn't a single word said about this before the election. Not a word.
We didn't want to do this.
And for Kate, the Tory party produced a document last week at question time which showed that they were considering it in May, which I cannot believe.
So that document talked about us considering eligibility. You know, you can increase eligibility. You know, you can deliver something like this to more people.
You've not demonstrated that.
You've
not done it.
So just in terms of that document, I think it was a bit rich for Douglas Ross. If nobody's seen the exchanges, this won't make sense. But it was a bit rich for him to assume that we were going in one direction when we just said we would reconsider the eligibility.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me give the gentleman in the back row. He's been waiting patiently. Yes, on you go.
Jackie Baillie mentioned the word hypocrisy there. My belief is in Scotland we don't kill our old with cold. The fact that those new Labour MPs in Westminster actually voted for the government for their own career benefit is disgusting, and it's Scotland's shame.
Jackson Carlo.
If the Conservatives had proposed this, Jackie Baillie would be howling abuse at the Conservatives for having it. And it's all very well for Keir Starmer in metropolitan London, you know, barbecuing his turkey on Christmas Day in his shorts and his T-shirt. The whole point is the weather up here is colder and pensioners in Scotland will suffer and some will die as a result of this decision. And Jackie Baillie used to weep in the chamber about the old folk in Weston Barton who were being denied the emergency fuel credit. Now they're not getting any fuel supplement whatsoever. And what are they doing? They're raising this money not to fill the black hole, but we now know to give train drivers and £60,000 in inflation-busting pay rise. This is a direct transfer from people the Labour Party cynically think aren't their biggest voting group to people they think will vote for them. And it's completely the wrong decision and it's unforgivable.
Jackie Baillie, have you completely underestimated the public mood on this?
I think the public have been very clear about what they think about this. There are pensioners who don't need this money, and some of them have said that. Some of them already give the money away, either to local charities or they don't take it. But I do think we need to listen very carefully to what people have said about eligibility and about the threshold being higher, which is why pension credit was one thing. They've expanded it to include people with attendance allowance. And obviously, we are listening.
And are you going to axe the single person's council tax discount? Is that what's coming next?
To be honest, there are no plans that I'm aware of. I know people have pursued this.
Well, you seem to be in the dark then, Jackie, because we're hearing that the Labour Chancellor is going to announce this in our budget.
Can I also say this is devolved? Yeah, but it's not a matter for, you know, it would only apply...
Thank goodness that the SNP will protect our pensioners.
There are no plans to do this.
Well, hang on a second. Gentleman in the cap there in the audience. Hang on a second. Gentleman in the cap here. Yes, on you go.
Jackie, I feel there's one thing missing here, and that's the issue of corporate greed. The boss of British Gas has increased his salary and bonus packages up to £8 million. I would like to see more courage from yourself and every other single politician here to focus on that and to provide energy at a cheap price to the people of the nation, because right now we're living in rip-off Britain. In Iran, it costs 15 pence per litre for petrol and diesel. The prices that we pay for energy are too high, and there are people that are profiting to exorbitant amounts, and I'm looking for courage from you, and what I'm hearing is a lot of hot air.
And maybe in the glasses here.
Yeah, I feel very disappointed, actually, because it seems to me that the representatives from the different parties are actually trying to score points. party politics on an issue which is really, really important, and where people are going to be dying because they don't have enough heating for their homes. And I think for a Labour government to take that stance when there are so many other ways that money could be saved, for that to be the first way that you guys decide to save money is atrocious. And quite frankly, please stop trying to score points on SNP2. Stop it. You know, start thinking about the people that this is actually affecting. And I would say, absolutely, it's outrageous, and shame on you for accepting it.
OK, thank you. There's other things we want to get through on the programme this evening. Your views on that and everything else you hear tonight. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from Gary. Gary Young. Evening, Gary.
The recent announcement about Grangemouth oil refinery closing in 2025 will leave our oil-rich country vulnerable and dependent on others for vital resources. Why has more not been done to find ways to make the refinery viable?
Thank you. Alex Salmond, how have we got into this position with Grangemouth, a jewel in the crown for Scotland's energy, past and present? How have we got to this stage where it is closing?
Oh, 100 years, exactly. Grangemouth's been in production. And it'd be astonishing, disgraceful, to allow the closure of your only refinery when you're still an oil and gas producing nation, as I said earlier. Now, Grangemouth, there's been questions about Grangemouth before. I, with others, helped save it twice in 2008 and again in 2013. But it's quite instructive to look at these. In 2008, in a joint initiative with Gordon Brown, we stepped in to resolve a dispute at Grangemouth, which was threatening the future of the refinery. And in 2013, it was almost the reverse. We had to step in to help the unions who were under severe pressure from INEOS. But twice that was done. But the key point is this. It was a political priority to make sure the refinery did not close. Now, if you want to say Grangemouth now, there's two ways to do it. Firstly, you could say to oil and gas companies, Ed Miliband could, you have to give first refining preference to Grangemouth on environmental grounds. Why? Because Grangemouth has two pipelines going into it, and obviously it's a lot more environmental to pipe oil, crude oil in and refine it in a refinery than to export crude oil and then to have a line of tankers coming up the Forth, which is what's going to happen. And if everybody incidentally has a house that overlooks the Forth, they'd get ready for a line of tankers re-importing refined oil. So you could do it on environmental grounds. The trouble is, of course, that Ed Miliband doesn't want to issue any oil and gas licences. And doesn't. But I would think
you can't do it on commercial grounds because it's losing $500 million a day.
OK, right, let's deal with that. A hydrocracker at Grangemouth isn't working just now. I mean, I won't go into the technology of refineries, but you need a hydrocracker to run an efficient refinery. It's not working just now. So make sure the hydrocracker's invested in, and you can change the economics of Grangemouth. The shop stewards, and incidentally, when it comes to the economics of refineries, I tend to believe the people who are actually working there often than I do the companies who want to have transfer pricing and do all sorts of things to disguise. But look, if every other oil-producing country refines its own product, so should Scotland. And the political priority for any Scottish government would not be to allow our only refinery to close. So Westminster, Scottish government, have to have the sense of political priority to make sure it doesn't close. Now, my understanding, for example, is that no Scottish First Minister since me has ever met Jim Ratcliffe. Now, it doesn't matter if you think he's the greatest guy on earth or whether you think he's the devil incarnate. He's the person who makes the ultimate decision over Scotland's refinery.
Kate Forbes,
and you have to establish a relationship to break the political...
I've met representatives of I've not met him directly, but I met the representatives this morning and have been for quite frequently over the last few weeks, and indeed over the last 18 months there's been a lot of work looking for a viable future. There's a number of different challenges. The first is that Grangemouth largely refines imported oil and gas. So it is not predominantly Scottish produced oil. The second is that it is absolutely essential when it comes to our just transition. So what do I mean by that? Is the fact that when it comes to carbon capture and storage, when it comes to the infrastructure, we do need Grangemouth. So looking at what the viable steps are to giving it a future is the priority of both governments right now. So nobody's given up. It was a commercial decision that the Petrol INEOS came to on the basis of the market fundamentals that were not working for them, although I take on board the points that Alex Salmond have made. And at the moment, the priority is a viable future, working collaboratively with the Labour government. To be fair, the collaboration has massively improved in the last 2 months. There wasn't a huge amount of collaboration prior to that. There was some, and a lot of the funding package that Jackie Baillie's talking about was already in motion from the last government. But that collaboration has changed things. I was at the first meeting between the Prime Minister and the First Minister. First item on the agenda, Grangemouth. So there's no lack of political prioritisation. It's about finding a viable future for it that works for the market, because nobody will take on a business that doesn't work.
Jackson Carlo.
Well, I think the First Minister acknowledged last week that the previous Conservative government had been working with the Scottish Government on this issue too. Actually, I'm not going to try and score political points on this, because at the moment, I think there is a duty on all the political parties in Scotland to work together to see whether or not a solution could be found. And the Conservative Party will work with other parties to try and achieve that. But the background to all of this, is an outright hostility to the whole oil and gas sector in Scotland. And we are going to, whether you want just transition, whether you want a greener economy or not, we are going to be relying on oil and gas for decades yet to come. And I'm afraid this naked prejudice against an industry which is vital to Scotland, produces hundreds of thousands of jobs, and is fundamental to the wealth of Scotland, to just try and kill it overnight, which is what the Greens tried to force the SNP to do in government, and which I don't understand why the SNP flirted with this. It was, I think, the wrong decision to do that. But that has affected the perception of Scotland as an oil and gas nation, and all of that undermines the confidence of investors and others who we need to invest in Scotland to keep this sector viable and thriving.
More than 400 jobs tied up in this. Lady in the blonde here, yes.
Sorry, it doesn't make sense to me. If you give 500 million, again, I'm harping on, 500 million to open up a new refinery, how much of that 500 million, or a tenth of it, would you need to put in? I don't understand, Mr. Salmon, about the fracking thing you mentioned, to bring it up to speed. Would that be 500 million to change a factory and save all these jobs? And the environmental, there'll not be super tankers coming up the Forth, there'll be rust buckets from everywhere. And there's going to be a catastrophe in the Forth that must happen, because you've got to discharge onshore again oil and whatever refinery they bring in. They've got to come in and unload there. So you're going to have some kind of environmental mess going on. They're not going to be careful every time. And there's usually storms and wind and weather. You're going to have all these problems. Just keep it open.
Hang on a second. I'm there from Jackie. It's Jackie. No, hang on a second. Jackie Baillie, why has more not been done to make Grangemouth viable?
Well, let me say, I think this is entirely a commercial decision by Petro Ineos, and it affects my constituency too. I know that might be bizarre because Dumbarton is a great distance from Grangemouth, but actually the Finnet Ocean Terminal, which is where the pipe runs from, is actually in my patch. So it has an impact across Scotland. It's a decision that frankly, I think is the wrong one. I am very, very pleased that there is work between both governments, because it's too important just to leave, and shout at each other about. This is about how we maintain that industry in the future, and actually, importantly, how we maintain that site in the future as part of the just transition. So already there are identified potential energy projects that could happen there, that both the Scottish Government and the UK Government are working together on. I want to keep what's there, but it's a commercial decision taken by Petro Ineos, and what we need to do is try and find a future for that workforce, for that site. I was interested that Michelle Thompson, one of the SNP MSPs, says she knows a buyer. We haven't heard much about that, and I didn't think the government knew about that. But let's explore all opportunities that there are, and let's make sure that there is a future for the workforce that are there as
Alex Salmond?
Well, the lady asked the right question. What percentage of the loan guarantee is in Rotterdam would you require to bring the hydrocracker at Grangemouth? Less than 10% of it. And the point is that it's a huge instrument of legitimate pressure. All this stuff about a commercial decision. I was an energy economist for some time before I fell among thieves at Westminster. But the idea that the oil and gas industry operates in anything other than major power plays. NASO and Jim Ratcliffe will do what's in their commercial interest to do. So the job is not to say, oh dear, it's a commercial decision. You've got to make it in their commercial interest to either invest themselves or alternatively give it to another buyer who will require the investment. You don't just sit back and say, oh dear, it's a commercial investment. Make it commercial. That's why we elect governments and are not meant to be run by oil and gas companies.
Gentleman in the back row.
100%, Alex. The Belgian government just the other day published that they will not accept the planning for the Petroineos ethanol cracker, which was planned for Antwerp. So that money is now free. It's government money. Why can't that money be diverted to rescue Grangemouth and putting in place the cracker there? It doesn't make any sense at all. I don't actually... It's driving me mad to hear the SNP and Labour talking about transitional jobs. We all know that when a major industry goes down, it takes out thousands of jobs, as it will when Grangemouth closes. Those few hundred transitional jobs will not save those communities from disaster. They will not save those other industries which rely on Grangemouth. And what you two should be doing is fighting to keep that refinery open for the people of Scotland. It's a national asset.
Kate Forbes.
It is a national asset. So, 2 points. Substantial funds have been spent already at Grangemouth. So, huge amount of work in the last 2 years in particular in order to ensure that Grangemouth had a future. They've made this decision earlier than we had hoped, earlier than we had expected, earlier than we had liked. At the moment, our #1 priority is a viable future for the site. I accept you need to make it commercial. Of course you do. You need to find people that want to take it on in terms of that viable future. Petroineos have made the decision that they've made, that they want out. That doesn't mean it's the end of the site. The point now is that now that they've made that decision, we are working night and day to make sure that there is a viable future for that site.
Yeah, quickly, on you go.
Jim Ratcliffe actually said that the site was valueless. So a commercial decision by the Scottish Government and everyone in HR could easily say, well, we'll give you £1 for it, Jim. We'll just give you £1.
Very briefly, Alex.
Mr Ratcliffe, as you know, sir, wants to keep the chemical operation because he sees a very substantial future in that. Now, the point is you have to tie the things together. You say you can't have the chemical operation unless you make sure the refinery stays open. That's what makes a difference, as opposed to just accepting, oh dear, it's a commercial decision.
We will return to this, I'm sure. Your views at home, though, the hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Let's go to our final question of the night, which comes from Anthony Lunn. Anthony, evening.
If Australia can't afford the Commonwealth Games, how come cash-strapped Glasgow can? And where are the athletes going to stay? Are they going to step over the homeless to get into hotels?
Jackson Carlow.
Well, I actually am pleased that the Commonwealth Games are going to take place. There is funding coming from Australia, there's funding coming from a number of associated parties. Actually, hopefully, this is not going to be a burden on Scotland, but it's actually going to be a huge opportunity for Glasgow and for Scotland. And Glasgow, my goodness, it needs some opportunities at the moment, because if you visit that city, if it's your home city as it is mine, it's in a pretty poor state as matters stand just now. And that's thanks to the SNP administration, I'm afraid, that's run it and left Sauchiehall Street more or less dug up with metal cages round it for the last year. We need something, I think, to take the city forward, and I think the Commonwealth Games offers us a huge opportunity. It's not the Games of 2014. It will be slightly reduced. We'll have to decide what the sports are. And looking to previous Commonwealth Games, obviously, in 2014, a village was built in Dalmarnock. That's now been sold on for housing. People are living there. There have been previous Commonwealth Games where they've used accommodation, student accommodation, other types of accommodation of that kind for a short-term, temporary event. But I think those of us who remember 2014 remember it was hugely energising for the city and for Scotland. I'm pleased the Games are being saved, and I'm looking forward to attending them.
Kate Forbes, Australia said no thanks, so did Singapore, so did Malaya. What do you know? Where do you see an opportunity that they don't?
There's two big opportunities. So, as you can imagine, these negotiations have been going on for the last few months. And actually, maybe some of your scepticism was some of our earlier scepticism. And we worked very closely with a number of different bodies and organisations to ensure that there was substantially more money on the table, so £100 million. So the Scottish Government hasn't been asked for any funding to be spent on the Games, which is incredible. So we will have the Games essentially funded by a number of other different organisations, including the Commonwealth Games Federation, to put these Games on. The second thing is, it's going to be very different from 2014. So what we have in our minds about 2014, the size of it, this is going to be a slimmed down model. And part of the reason is, you'll know that the Commonwealth Games has been struggling to find hosts. And so if it's to have a long-term future, we need to rethink the Commonwealth Games in order that this isn't the last one, but actually there's future hosts. So it will be very different. But the way I see it is that the Scottish Government won't be asked to spend any money on it, but we will get all the economic benefits of it and the cultural benefits and the sporting opportunities. It's the only sporting opportunity where we get to compete as Scotland. And that's incredible for our athletes.
So you can look, as Cabinet Secretary of the Economy, you can look at this room full of taxpayers in the eye and say, this will not cost you a penny at any stage.
The Scottish Government's not been asked to put money into the pot. This is the point. So in terms of the overall funding package of £100 million being put on the table, it's coming from a number of different areas. Now, of course, we will support Glasgow City Council with a number of the sort of general infrastructure requirements. But this funding will be improving some of the stadiums, will be improving some of the facilities that we have.
Where's that money going to come from?
So this funding is coming from a mixture of the Commonwealth Games Federation. There's a bit of support from Australia itself in terms of funding that they received. The UK government is putting some money into it as well. But our bottom line was that the Scottish Government couldn't afford to put money on the table. And so in a sense, it's a win-win to get the economic benefit without our under-pressure budget putting more money on the table.
Jackie Baillie.
What's interesting is Glasgow is now only the third city in the world to hold the Games twice. The first one was, in fact, Edinburgh. Right? And so I found that really interesting in front of an Edinburgh audience. And we looked at the benefit to Edinburgh, the Commonwealth Games pool being one of them, and we look at the benefit that there's been to Glasgow.
And Robert Maxwell had to step in to save the Edinburgh Games.
Oh, there you go. I didn't remember
which
that.
Which ended up in a financial crisis.
But I think the issue here is that it's scaled down. We already have most of the facilities. They've been built. The economic benefit to Glasgow and Scotland is, noted and I think important when you consider the damage that's been done to our hospitality and tourism industry. This is really important as an injection into Glasgow and Scotland that I think we can be proud of. And, I loved the last Commonwealth Games, and I'm really looking forward to the next one.
Alex Salmon?
Well, I thought the great facilities that were built in Glasgow 10 years ago were tremendous valuable for money. And I was pleased to be able to be part of that. The hydro, the velodrome, they've been a huge impetus for the leisure and sporting economy in Glasgow. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a scaled-down Games. I think some of the points that Kate makes there is correct. The one thing I would absolutely, if I could make some advice from the experience of 10 years ago, for goodness sake, don't have it run by committees, either in the council or the civil service. Appoint one person. 10 years ago it was Robert Smith, who's got the nous and experience to be the Games Supremo so that decisions can be made effectively and properly. If we had to build an athletes' village, would it be a bad thing to build housing, particularly if it became socially rented housing in the city of Glasgow? I think that wouldn't be a bad investment at all. So all in all, don't expect the same extravaganza as 10 years ago, but I think it's a good decision. But for goodness sake, appoint a Supremo and don't have it run by committee, otherwise you'll end up with half-built ferries.
Is that a pitch for a job by any chance, Alex Salmon?
No, but Robert Smith might still be available, who knows? But somebody, you need somebody, and there's a number of possibilities with the business acumen who's got a proven track record, who can take rapid decisions and make sure it stays on budget.
Anthony, who asked our question, what do you think? This question suggests you've got concerns about this.
Yes, is each one of you as individuals going to go into Glasgow and say to the man in the sleeping bag, can you move into that next doorway till they get into this hotel?
Well,
I don't think that's the choice that we should accept.
No, but
I mean, homelessness has gone to record levels. We've got children, you know, in temporary accommodation, which we know damages their life chances. We need to fix that problem, and we need to fix it now, and not make it a choice between one or the other.
I understand that's a separate problem, but you're talking about putting up, what, 200, 400 athletes into prepaid hotels? But you cannot put one of our own into a bed for the night.
To be honest, I would put homeless people into a bed for the night. I would give them housing, something that this current government has failed to do. The problem is getting worse. It's a stain on Scottish society. Quite frankly, people should not be sleeping rough on our streets.
Gentleman in the black and white T-shirt up there, yes.
Could go back to the gentleman's point of view. My family have been down the homeless route. We were in a private accommodation. There's no laws against your private landlord kicking you out and give 2 months notice to get out. We went down the homeless route. We were told by both the Scottish Government and the local council there's no need for anybody sleeping on the streets in Scotland. If you're homeless, they will put you in bed and breakfast for 2 weeks. If you have children, they'll put you in temporary accommodation. There's no reason for anybody in Scotland to be sleeping on the streets by law.
And man in the blue shirt here.
It's not quite so much focused on the homeless people, but it's kind of a 2-week wham-bam, thank you, ma'am, and off we go. What will be done to sustain interest in sport and raise aspiration for Scottish people?
We talk about legacy, don't we? Economic and sporting legacy, Kate. What's that going to be?
So that's been one of our biggest focuses when it comes to the discussion. So there's a number of different things. There will be funding, again, not from the Scottish Government, directly supporting initiatives that happen around the games, getting into schools, supporting young people and so on. But the other thing is that there will be this substantial investment in the infrastructure. So, you know, Alex Hammond has already outlined the legacy from the facilities that we got in 2014. So there will be funding to reinvest in that. And then the third legacy is the support for businesses and organisations with the number of visitors that are coming. So I think we'll see quite substantial legacy. And again, it goes back to get that legacy and that impact from actually not spending terribly much. I think it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, you said not spending anything. Now you're saying not spending terribly
much.
Well,
in terms of more generally, but from the Scottish Government perspective, we are putting money on the table.
Kate. I would like to have Pumeza singing Freedom Kamoy again at the opening ceremony. I thought that was absolutely terrific. So make an opening ceremony that says something about Scotland and the world.
That's an opportunity, isn't it? Quickly, Jackson.
But we had a very long time to plan for 2014.
Yeah.
We've only got 18 months to plan for this event in 2026. I mean, although it'll be slightly pared back, things like track, swimming, cycling, these things will still happen, so we'll see it.
The clock has stopped for us this evening. That's it for tonight. Back with you next week in Dundee. Have a look at our website for future dates for the programme as well, if you want to come along and join us. If you missed any of tonight's show, we're repeated later on BBC One Scotland, or catch us anytime on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel tonight and to our audience in Edinburgh, and of course to you at home for watching. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in Debate Night, good night.